So if you recall, we were still talking about ancillary secondary maps and how the secondary world and all of these derivative directions, the wordy word of men is in a sense word simply superimposed on the primary world. And we were last mentioning how it was that for such secondary maps to operate most efficiently, the passion of the primary world, which the secondary in a strict sense is devoid thereof, but for the passion in some way to show through this overlay, which is, of course, the reality behind all ideas that advertising is really irrelevant insofar as a message, or that political sloganeering from outside the community is looked upon as being moot, vacuous, when it was not what was said, it was the emotion, the passion. So even while passion is in a real sense what carries ordinary maps, all the way from religion to advertising, anything you want to do, although it is passion that in a quite real sense carries the maps, you can also see that were it not for the passion, just looked at slightly differently, what seems to be the real info, the information, the intellectual, the secondary aspect of the message would be almost meaningless. In other words, you could not get the information over. You're back to, I know I've used it so many times that some of you are going to think it's a cliche, but I do it for a particular reason, and don't miss out. You're down to almost the level, the intellectual intercourse that's almost no more, almost can be no more than two strangers on the street, and one says, "Do you know what time it is?" And the guy says, 5:30. He says, "Thanks." Now, it could have been very important information to the guy. He could have been going for a job interview at 5:30. But that is about as close as you can get to what would be a purely, relatively speaking, secondary interchange. And of course, if you really get good, you'd also have to see that no one would have asked. The first man would not have asked what time it was of a stranger, unless there was some passion behind him wanting to know. The job. He had a date. The passion can either carry what would have been supposedly some important information. It can, on the other hand, it can make up for a lack, if you analyzed it from some more secondary position, can make up for a lack of what in essence amounts to almost a vacuum of intellectual information. But all in all, the passion is what makes the maps, the information, seem to be more useful. But now, let's consider it a bit further. That's easy enough to see. Consider it a bit further that when you're speaking of the collective world, it will run quite properly on ancillary, derivative, representational sources. But if you're going to understand anything else about life outside of that, you have got to be able to push what you think, the way you think about life, the way you think. You've got to be able to push it beyond any such areas. That is, it's got to go beyond the place where the information, where the maps might or might not be of any use. Because the collective data in the secondary world, all collective data at best, from another view, is problematic. Now, if it's being thought, as one of the Kairouts said, if it's already being thought and put into words in the secondary world, there is some reality to it. Which once you get, it's no big deal. Well, to ordinary people it would be, because they'd want to fist fight you about it. But it's really no big deal to see that that is the basis of everyone else arguing about, wait a minute, does astrology work? Wait a minute. Are there such things as flying saucers? Wait a minute! Are they really gods? The question then is, well, sir, what do you think? I say there are. Is that the right answer? I don't know. Do you want a second try? Yeah, let me try again. All right, I say they're not. Do you understand at all what I'm pointing out to say that under ordinary conditions, all derivative maps are at best in the condition of may or may not be useful. And it's got nothing to do with what ordinary people call, as they flex their neural muscles, the truth. It has to do with somebody finds them useful. I'm expressing it in another way to try to get you to at least turn your head that they may or may not be useful. Now, see, ordinary minds would take that to be, well, wait a minute, you're making a comment on the map, on the noun. You're saying that that particular map might or might not be useful. What map are you talking about? Oh, I don't know. What do you want? Religion. All right, religion. No, I don't like that one. How about economics? Okay, economics. No, wait a minute, that's too easy. Weather forecasting. Okay. Changes in fashion. The ordinary mind would take the comment to be, when I say that a revolutionist approach to thinking would have to be to go beyond any area wherein the ancillary maps, wherein the information might or might not be useful. An ordinary mind say, well, you're talking about things, because remember, verbs improved are what? Not angels, not gods. No, it's better than that. When verbs die, or if they really work out, or eat the right food, plenty of brand and roughage, and pray. When verbs really begin to amount to something, what do they become? Nouns. Which is another Kairut tonight. Men are describing unwittingly the characteristic of all their gods and heroes: being wonderful, detached, objective, non-involved, and dead. Because they have ceased to be a verb. That is the belief. When you die, what do you become? Everybody, no matter whether you're a Muslim or Jew or whatever, the idea when you die is what? That things do not become more complex. Or God forbid that things even just go along at the same level of complexity as now, which is a process. No. When I die, listen, by God, I won't be dead. That is, I won't become a noun. Of course, I know they go further and say, no, I'm going to come back. I'm not actually dead. I don't want to go into it, but I know I lay there and seem to rot. But no, that's not. I come back as a person who is no longer a verb. That's the idea. I'll be like God. I'll be dead. I'll have no characteristics. I will be, it was in quotation marks, the Kairut, verbs improved. Nouns. All right. If you talk about, as I was doing, that a revolutionist has got to push his own thinking beyond an area where the ancillary maps, whatever information is available, to where it may or may not be useful. The ordinary mind says, well, you're talking about specific information. You're saying that if you're going to in some way learn something new or have a more comprehensive view of life, you got to find the right kind of map. Instead of fooling around with maps, it might be useful, or fooling around with whoever you want to pick on. You say, well, you got to get away from religion, or you got to get away from the regular academic world, you got to get away from the rational mind, you got to get away from anything. They're saying that the map itself may or may not be useful. Tut tut. It's beyond the area where any map might or might not be useful. What good is that? If all information, if all collective data is problematic, of course you're ordinary and running on that kind of quite proper imbalance, continuing imbalance in the polarity of polarized thinking, then no matter what information it is, it's a dice toss. It's a coin toss. People just don't see it that way. They say, oh no sirree. I am convinced the truth lies in democratic principles. The truth lies in a complete understanding and some kind of emotional embrace of Marxism. or Christianity, Buddhism, it is still a coin toss because it is problematic to them. They have no choice. It's got nothing to do with the person. It's got nothing to do with the map. It's got nothing to do with the apparent institution. It has to do with the fact that when you're dealing with ancillary information, derivative maps, which all of them are, then in any instance, forget the map specifically, in any instance, they may or may not be useful. But ordinary people take it, wait a minute, I can't deal with this kind of thing. You're talking about processes, and it seems, you're trying to get me to hold an eel, and I've already got lard on my hands. No, we got to get this down. It's not my hands. Here's the question: is that the proper eel that will take me to intellectual fields, Elysian fields? Is that the kind of eel that will take me to a neural paradise? And it's not. All right. If you're ordinary, it might be. Now, what do you mean by that? Well, it might be. Well, what's the odds? The best that life has to offer is 50-50. And then ordinary people can go, well, I'm not sure I want to play, which is always real interesting. I guess they should write in and see if they can join up with the International Institute of Hermits. Well, I don't know whether I want to play or not, which is to say, I'm not sure I want to think or not. Or it's like the guy, remember, that had a certain attitude, kept a nice full pack of suicide in his back pocket and told life, don't you fuck with me. And of course, life was taken aback. Well, let's be a little more specific. It's not just some kind of general statement that you got to go beyond a place where maps, ancillary maps, might or might not be useful. A little more specific, because it has to do with the way that people say they think, the words they put on it, that is, the retelling of the maps. That this kind of place that you would be reaching for here, very specific, and this covers it all. The kind of place that you are attempting to reach in the intellect is not back to the primary, which is probably the most common, nor is it just in some way to take on, to move over to some other part of the collective secondary world. But under any ordinary conditions, that is the extent of the choice. But it cannot be. It is not a return to Eden, nor is it some new jaunt off to a lateral earthly utopia. And that's all that you have at the ordinary level, no matter how you cut it. No, there is no other possibilities. That covers it. You can change the words. But when ordinary people, if they hear the idea, which ordinary people do hear it, they hear it rattling in their own genetic code. They don't just hear it from me or somebody. But they hear, you should be thinking in a different way. That is, you should be better. You should be expanded. And it comes out in all the ways you know that you should be a better Jew or Christian, or if you're going to be a Mason, by God, keep your dues up. But then if you ask, or if a person asks themselves, which they'd have no occasion to do, but let's play the game, if you ask them, well, exactly what is it to be a better person? Forget the ritual, forget the tradition, forget that somebody says, yes, you're a good Baptist. What do you think it would be that would improve your perception, your consciousness, your understanding of life, your acceptance, your tolerance, your sensitivity, everything good and decent and wholesome? Powdered sugar. They would only have one of two things to say. They would say, well, what we should do is go back to better times. Return to Eden. In some way, if we can just go back to the past, before the great, remember those terrifying headlines, that man still sees them. It was just a new version. The rest of you grew up in certain areas that you thought the headline says, Adam pisses God. That kind of thing. Buddha stumps his toe and says, damn. This guy remembers it another way. He still has these flashbacks, the headlines of that dreadful day come back to him. It says, 2,000 experts can't be wrong. I know a lot of you responded to that. There are two good versions. The other one is 2,000 experts can be wrong. See? But if you do them both in one, then people are prone to do like that guy that wrote Kairouk last time, you remember? When Kairouk was pointing out about a man a few days after the accident, when he had fully regained consciousness, it was immediately discovered that he had lost absolutely all memory of adverbs. And a man wrote in and says, in regards to such stories you just made up, speaking for us regular folks, I say that it might be more meaningful if, in that instance, you would have said, when he regained consciousness, it was immediately discovered that he had lost absolutely all memory of adverbs and the 79 Mets, because then we could have accepted that as being simply a joke with no other possible pertinence. Huh? Now do you follow? Well, I'm not sure. The ordinary mind has only two places, and it does, of course, doesn't even see it as places because it's the movement of energy, but it sounds like places when I put dresses and suits and sweaters on the energy that is the human intellect. If you say, well, what would it be to be better? We should all be doing better in some way, and it's here. I mean, you can get almost anybody past the physical rituals and traditions and saying, well, I know that you want to be stronger, you want to be thinner, but now come on, is that really it in life? And if they're just ordinary, sane, middle-of-the-road city people, they'll finally say, well, no, it's something else. And they might even admit that they're no longer sure what it is. My parents believed the whole point was to be a good Lutheran. You know, and I don't know. But they would finally get past the point of saying, well, what I really want is a new Maserati. What I'd like to do is lose 50 pounds, have a nose job. You can get decent people, sane, ordinary people, finally the point of them saying, no, it's something else. But here, because it has to do with the nature of the polarized energy running the talking of the nervous system, they would say that this new way, the improvement, or if they would accept my terms, which they probably would for momentary discussion, if you're going to go past the point to where the possibilities are simply problematic, debatable, if we're going to get to some area wherein hope, promise, must lie, then it's going to be, and here it comes, it's going to be them believing. In some way we have got to go back. Or, I know they'll say we got to go forward. That would be the difference at the ordinary discussion level between conservatives and political background and liberals. And they'd say forward, but that's not it, because they don't know what forward is. What it amounts to, if it was us used instead of just a political context, same thing, but if we used a non-political context, religious, that a religious person would say we have got to go back. That man used to be better and he had a downfall. So all over the world, all the major religions and all the little teeny-weeny little religions you never heard of, they all believe it. All the way from ancestor worship, everything of that ilk, everything that passes for religion is the promise that change could happen, but they're always pointing back. And they provide the idea that change can occur when men know otherwise, which is what gives it its power, in case you never thought about it. Because that has tremendous power when the Titanic's going down and everybody around you is drowning and the captain comes by and says, no problem. And you think, well, good, I appreciate you telling me that. And you feel better? That's religion. Not just religion, but that's anything in life that says, yes, you can change. And you go, well, I feel much better when you know otherwise. But at any rate, that's why all drugs are powerful. Even the ones physical drugs, not just religion or ideas that you know are not possible. But the reason of good physical, tangible drugs, why they're so popular is you can put them right in. You don't have to debate will it work or not. If you're the kind of person that drinks, you know goddamn well it'll work. Give me that bottle. I know damn well I can have 2 or 3 drinks and I believe that, I bear a striking resemblance in a way to Sean Connery. And of course you know you don't. But 2 drinks and you do. Yes, but I know I don't. Right. But that's why you like it. Same thing. I believe everyone's drowning. The captain says, not to worry, you won't. No, it's no problem. And the water's already at your ankles and up to his knees. And you go, well, I feel much better. Not being sarcastic. You do. You think, well, God, I appreciate you coming by. That's it. That is the looking back. All religion says we have slipped. That to do better, to be able to reach a point in our thinking, although they don't use the terms like that. But for me to do better, we have got to go back. The alternative, although they may say we got to go forward, that as opposed to a religious person, especially a conservative religious person, but all religious people, vis-a-vis the context or the example I'm about to place on the other side of it, would be a humanist, as it would be called nowadays. Now, humanists say, well, religion is outdated and blah, blah, blah. And they would be saying what we've got to do is look for man himself to be the benchmark of perfection. That man has got to, in some way, evolve himself and blah, blah, blah. And it sounds as though they would say, well, religious people are pointing to the past. But us humanists, we're looking to the future, and they're not. I mean, they believe they are, and they're trying to, but all they can do is simply, again, the basis of the intellect. Remember, a guy pointed out very early in tonight's Kairos, one guy concluded, memory is not kind. The humanist, as opposed to a religionist, would say we're pointing to the future rather than the past, because the religious people are pointing to the past, which is a fair description. But the humanist can't point to the future. No one can at the ordinary level. All they do is point to some lateral jaunt, an idea of an earthly utopia. That Mount Olympus, the Elysian fields, are not off somewhere. They have got to be here by God. Religion, the whole idea of heaven and paradise, it may or may not be true. I don't know. But I know one thing. The only thing that we know for sure is we got this life. And we are making a grave mistake. We're ignoring our potential if we do not do all that's possible to see that justice is done and the poor are served and the hungry are fed, is to do our best. And when I say utopia on earth, I'm not being sarcastic, of course. They believe that if there is some way to map a movement of improvement for humanity, it's now. Of course, they would say it's the future, as opposed to religious people saying, oh, we've made God mad and we're paying off some debt and things can't ever improve. The other possibility is, and humanism is not something new, it's just a fairly new term, there's always been the polarity of someone else saying, nah, forget all that. It's not true, or it may not be true, we don't know. But we know one thing, we have got to deal with what the problems now and perfect ourselves now. They look at that as being the future, as opposed to religious people, the more conservative, pointing to the past and saying, well, it does no good to make any effort because we screwed up back then. And we went off the trail way back then. We went, when they began selling condoms and saying the word out loud, that's when life went to hell. And so they say we're in some way pointing away from the unchangeable past, the dark past. We're pointing to the future, and they're not. They can't. They're pointing to what would amount to the attempt to make a side trip. It's still lateral to the people pointing to the past, because it's still here, the idea, and of course, now you get fast. We're not talking about setting up a commune of utopia out there. I'm talking about in the human nervous system. Because they're saying all I got to do is find a new area in what people already collectively think. That the secret's already out here. All I got to do is find my way through it. I've got to buy a new book. Who's the latest mystic? Who's the latest guru? What's the newest religious thinking? What's the newest philosophical thinking? That the collective mind out there, don't worry about some little farm out in Indiana. They're looking for utopia. They say here, as opposed to heaven or in the past, that idea. But they're looking for it in here. But it's not an improvement. It's at the same level as everything going on. Their idea of an intellectual utopia is at the same level as the people they're attacking. At that level, all declarations of war are likewise simultaneously announcements of surrender. Because as soon as you say, hey, this group over here, no, we have got to persevere against such as that. That kind of outdated, moldy fig thinking. No, we've got to overcome it. Whoever said it had to say it. But by so announcing, yes, We're against everything else at this level. We're against the collateral thought in this way, the collective thought. All they're saying is they're admitting it, that all maps may or may not be useful. But wait a minute, this one's not useful. Therefore, we announce holy warfare, intellectual, divine, progressive warfare against these outdated people, which is also to say, yes, I surrender, which is to say, I can't get away from here, which is to say, my God, I'm beating up on a tar baby again. What you're attempting to do internally, intellectually, by these kinds of maps, granted that I'm making up all the descriptions, but by understanding that you can't go back to the past. It's not open to debate, it's not right or wrong, it's all on one level. You're at that same level of the horizon, wherein things seem to disappear, and then they come back. Wait a minute, something different, right. Wait a minute. Of course, you get good, you think, wait a minute, that's that thing that just disappeared, and it almost fooled me because now it's backing up. But you know, there's not that much difference in a hippo head-on and from the rear end. I mean, once you recognize it, then you are aware of the fact that for years I've been seeing these hippos back up over the horizon and kind of slowly disappear. And I think, well, now we're getting somewhere. And then suddenly they come back in this direction. You think, well, new problems or new solutions. To get past the point that ordinary thought would have it, that if there is somewhere new to go, to get away from maps that might or might not be useful, then you can't go back, and you cannot simply make some lateral trip over to an area that is still part of the collective's secondary thinking now. What you'd be doing is having to go into an area that would be in the intellectual garden, fresh, unspaded, as opposed to, if you recall, in the older areas, as per a Kairut, in the older areas of the collective garden, the intellectual life of man, no matter where it is, no matter the degree of education, no matter what time zone, once you see it, it's not right or wrong, but it explains a lot. In the older areas of the garden, that is, the garden as it is now, the garden as it is cultivated by the collective mind of man, in that garden, to a revolutionist, even the most diverse, the most exotic flowers smell suspiciously similar. That, once you see it, is the personal resolution of all of this. It doesn't matter people pointing forward, people pointing this way, people hollering out, let's be blanks, and other people saying, let's be anti-blanks. How much diverse, how much more exotic, how much more discreet could the red flower over here be against the anti-red flower? Except they all begin to smell understate. Here comes the understated part. Begin to smell suspiciously similar.